Donc, je me lance. Bonjour à tous. Welcome to all. Je suis Boris Proulx, journaliste au journal Le Devoir. Bienvenue dans cette conférence de presse virtuelle au sujet de cette saison des feux de forêt. On this virtual press conference today, we have online Bill Blair, President of the King's Privy Council, Jean-Yves Duclos, ministre de la Santé du Canada, Julie Dzerowicz, Member of Parliament for Davenport, and Dr. Theresa Tam, Chief Public Health Officer of Canada. Après une brève allocution, ils répondront aux questions des médias. Je vais vous donner la parole sur Zoom, donc si vous assistez en ligne à cette conférence de presse, vous pouvez utiliser le bouton « Lever la main » à tout moment. Et je vous donnerai la parole donc durant la période de questions. So please use the raise hand function at any time during this press conference, and during after in the question period, I'll hand you over the mic. So on that, Minister, you have the floor.
Bon après-midi tout le monde. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to begin my remarks by acknowledging that I am speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe people. Earlier this morning, we released the most recent wildland fire forecast. And similar to the update that we provided to Canadians in June, this forecast outlines a high likelihood of heightened fire activity through the next 2 months. Drought conditions, when coupled with above normal temperatures across most of the country, means that the risk of fire activity is going to remain very high throughout the majority of the summer. In July, most of Canada, from British Columbia and the north through to the prairies and across the country to Western Labrador, will be at high risk. And as we move into August, while the total area does decrease, especially in Eastern Canada, at-risk areas still are projected to include Western Canada, the North, Ontario, and Western Quebec. As of today, there are 648 wildfires burning, with 339 of those fires designated as currently out of control. To date, there have been 3,415 wildfires nationally, and approximately 8.8 million hectares of land has been burned. Today, 4,578 people remain evacuated across the country, and some Canadians have lost their homes and personal belongings in the fires. Quite apparently, 2023 now carries the unfortunate distinction of being Canada's worst wildfire season on record. And while we have been fortunate in the past few days to see rain in parts of the country, thunderstorms can increase the risk of fire activity due to lightning strikes. And warmer temperatures are also beginning to build at this point right across the country throughout the summer. And there are heat warnings currently in place for parts of Alberta, the Northwest Territories, Ontario, Quebec, Newfoundland, and Labrador. And that heat can bring with it increased risk. Additionally, more than 45 Indigenous communities have been affected by wildfires, including several that are currently evacuated. Indigenous Services Canada continues to support communities with evacuation efforts, including paying 100% of eligible costs related to wildfire evacuations. And to date, more than $63 million in advance payment funding has been provided to help cover the costs associated with these evacuations, including transportation, accommodation, and food. The funds that are available also cover emergency response measures, including establishing fire guards and putting in place emergency operations center wherever possible. Mr. Haidu and her officials from Indigenous Services Canada are working closely with Indigenous communities, and they are in constant contact to provide the support that they may need. Over the course of this wildfire season, the Government of Canada has also been there to support the provinces and territories with their response, and we stand ready to provide additional federal resources as they require. And to date, we have approved requests for federal assistance from Alberta, Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Ontario. And just last week, we announced that we are extending the Canadian Armed Forces deployment in Quebec. Firefighters and emergency management personnel from across Canada have been doing exceptional work since our season began, and they have also received assistance from many international partners. The Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre is working diligently to ensure that the affected regions receive the resources that they need to combat these fires. And this week alone, we have welcomed more firefighters from the United States, Mexico, and South Korea. And this is in addition to support that we have already received from Chile, New Zealand, Costa Rica, Portugal, the European Union, France, South Africa, and Spain. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell all of our international partners who have been instrumental in helping fight these fires to keep Canadians safe. We say thank you. This year's wildfire season has taken a tremendous toll on many communities, Evacuations, poor air quality due to smoke, and personal losses can have a significant impact on physical and mental health. In some of the worst hit areas, neighborhoods have been destroyed by the fires, leaving residents without a place to call home. I want to encourage all Canadians in higher risk areas to look out for one another, to follow the guidance of your local authorities, and stay prepared. And while there is serious fire risk in several parts of the country, I want to assure Canadians that there are sufficient resources to respond and to keep Canadians safe. And finally, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the firefighters, first responders, and all emergency response personnel, community volunteers, and those who have been helped in those communities to help them recover. They're working tirelessly to manage these fires. Their work is critical, and all Canadians are grateful for your work. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And I will now turn the microphone over to my friend and colleague, Minister Duclos.
Merci, Bill. Et bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci de me permettre de m'adresser à vous aujourd'hui avec mes collègues, le ministre Blair, la députée Dzerowicz et la docteure Tam. Tel que mentionné par le ministre Blair, 2023 est déjà la pire année en termes de feux de forêt que nous ayons connus au pays. À l'échelle du pays, il y a 648 feux de forêt qui brûlent présentement, dont 339 sont considérés comme hors de contrôle. À ce jour, cette année, il y a eu 3415 feux de forêt au pays et environ 8,8 millions d'hectares ont déjà brûlé, ce qui est 12 fois la moyenne au cours des 10 dernières années. Nos pensées vont évidemment à ceux et celles qui ont quitté leur maison. Bien que certaines personnes évacuées aient pu rentrer chez eux, il y a encore tout près de 5000 personnes qui sont toujours évacuées partout au pays. Et avec le temps chaud, on sait que ce n'est malheureusement pas fini. Les feux de forêt peuvent menacer directement notre santé et notre sécurité. Continuons donc de suivre les consignes des autorités locales. La fumée des feux de forêt a aussi un impact sur notre santé. Et cette fumée peut voyager sur des milliers de kilomètres. Et en plus des impacts à court terme, le souffle court, les yeux qui piquent, la gorge irritée, des maux de tête, il faut aussi se méfier des impacts à long terme. Les jeunes enfants, les femmes enceintes, les aînés et les personnes avec des conditions préexistantes comme l'asthme sont particulièrement à risque. As forest fires are threatening our homes and security, the smoke can travel hundreds of kilometers. The wildfire smoke can have short-term consequences, burning eyes, sore throat, cough, and headache, as well as long-term impacts. This is especially true for young children, seniors, pregnant women, and people with pre-existing conditions like asthma. Il est possible de nous protéger et de protéger nos proches des polluants que l'on retrouve dans la fumée des feux de forêt. Vérifions la cote Air Santé disponible sur une foule d'applications. Une cote de 10+ est considérée comme un risque très élevé. Si la cote est élevée ou si nous sentons de la fumée, considérons rester à l'intérieur et fermons nos fenêtres. Réduisons nos activités à l'extérieur. Utilisons un bon filtre pour nos systèmes de ventilation. Un purificateur d'air portable peut également aider à filtrer les particules fines. Et si nous devons aller à l'extérieur, un couvre-visage ajusté et approprié comme un N95 peut aider à nous protéger. Let me repeat that in English. We can protect ourselves and our loved ones from wildfire smoke. Let's check the Air Quality Health Index, or AQHI, at a rating of 10+, that is considered to be very high risk. If the AQHI is high, or if we see and smell smoke in our area, we should consider staying indoors and avoiding strenuous outdoor activities. We can keep windows closed. We can use a clean, good quality air filter in our ventilation system. We can use a portable air purifier to filter particles from wildfire smoke. Or if we need to go outside, we can consider wearing a well-fitted respirator-type mask like an N95. I'm especially pleased to be joined today by Dr. Tam because the Public Health Agency of Canada has been working well and hard with provinces and territories since day one to support communities in need. It is thanks to the great collaboration between PHAC and our trusted partners like the Canadian Red Cross, the Northwest Company, food banks, and indigenous organizations that we can ensure that masks and other important supplies are getting to the communities that need them most. Grâce à ces partenariats et jusqu'à date, plus de 500 000 respirateurs N95 ont été livrés aux communautés qui en ont besoin. As the need is expected to grow in the coming weeks, we will continue to explore new opportunities to support communities across Canada. This summer, we are not only facing increased wildfire risk, we're also experiencing more frequent, longer, and more intense extreme heat events. In fact, in the last few days, the world recorded its hottest days on record. Beaucoup d'entre nous l'ont vécu ici même au Québec ou en Ontario, les dernières journées ayant été particulièrement chaudes. Et d'autres épisodes de chaleur intense sont à prévoir cet été. Pour nous protéger, restons au frais en fermant les rideaux pendant le jour, utilisons un ventilateur ou un climatiseur si c'est possible. Si nous devons aller à l'extérieur, prenons des pauses fréquentes à l'ombre ou à l'intérieur, portons un chapeau ou une casquette et buvons beaucoup d'eau. Si ce n'est pas possible pour nous de rester au frais à la maison, allons dans un endroit frais comme un centre d'achat ou une bibliothèque. À Québec, nous avons également ouvert le premier bassin portuaire en Amérique du Nord qui permet de se rafraîchir gratuitement et sécuritairement en plein centre-ville de la ville de Québec. Nous espérons évidemment voir d'autres initiatives de la sorte à travers le pays. Il est aussi important de vérifier que nos proches soient en sécurité, particulièrement les aînés. Les aînés se retrouvent trop souvent isolés et sont parfois réticents à demander de l'aide. En ce début de saison de festival, j'invite aussi tout le monde, jeunes et moins jeunes, à redoubler de prudence et à reconnaître les signes d'un coup de chaleur. Cela inclut des maux de tête et des étourdissements. During heat waves, it's also important to protect ourselves and others. Stay cool by closing blinds in our home during the day, using a fan or air conditioning if that is possible and available. If we go outside, taking frequent breaks inside or under the shade, wear a hat and stay hydrated. If we can't stay cool in our home, we can go to a cool area such as a shopping mall or a library. During heat waves, let us also check on our loved ones to make sure they are okay, especially seniors who can be isolated and reluctant to ask for help. En conclusion, les changements climatiques vont continuer d'engendrer davantage de feux de forêt et plus d'épisodes de chaleur extrême et plus de pluies intenses et d'inondations comme celles que nous avons vues récemment à Rivière-Éternité ou ailleurs dans Charlevoix ce printemps, avec malheureusement dans les deux cas des pertes de vie humaines. Nous devons continuer de combattre et de limiter les changements climatiques et nous devons continuer d'adapter nos communautés à cette nouvelle réalité. Before I conclude, let me also thank the firefighters and first responders from Canada and from abroad, as well as community volunteers and neighbors who have been keeping our communities safe during this challenging time. Nous sommes reconnaissants que le Centre interservices des feux de forêt du Canada travaille avec diligence pour s'assurer que les régions touchées reçoivent les ressources dont elles ont besoin pour lutter contre ces feux de forêt. Cette semaine, nous avons accueilli encore plus de pompiers des États-Unis, du Mexique et de la Corée du Sud. Merci énormément de votre appui. We are stronger together, and with this season just beginning, let us stay prudent and safe and take steps to protect ourselves and others. Thank you. Et je passe maintenant la parole à la Dr Tam.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je m'adresse à vous depuis Ottawa sur le territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe. Nous sommes témoins cet été des effets des changements climatiques, alors que le Canada continue d'être touché par les événements climatiques plus intenses et fréquents. De nombreuses régions et communautés partout au Canada luttent contre les effets des canicules, des feux de forêt, des inondations et des tempêtes intenses, et parfois de tous ces événements à la fois. La chaleur extrême présente un risque grave pour la santé. Les maladies causées par la chaleur peuvent rapidement vous toucher et entraîner des problèmes de santé à long terme, voire la mort. En 2021, en Colombie-Britannique, plus de 600 personnes ont perdu la vie pour cette raison. Peu importe où vous habitez au Canada, vous devez être conscient des enjeux que les feux de forêt et la chaleur extrême peuvent présenter pour votre santé et prendre des mesures pour vous protéger, vous et vos proches. Prepare for the heat by checking your local forecasts and alerts so you know when to take extra care. Wear loose-fitting, light-colored clothing made of breathable fabric and stay hydrated. To reduce your exposure to the combination of wildfire, smoke, and extreme heat, limit the time you spend outdoors. If possible, spend at least a few hours each day in a cool place with clean air. This could be your home or a place in your community, like a library or community center. Pay close attention to how you and those around you are feeling. If you feel unwell during hot weather, move to a cool place and drink liquids. Remember, water is best. Take cool showers or baths until you feel refreshed. Heat stroke, a severe form of heat illness, is a medical emergency. Symptoms can include a high body temperature, confusion and lack of coordination, dizziness or fainting, and a lack of sweating with very hot red skin. Should you or a loved one experience these symptoms, call 911 or your local emergency number immediately. Although extreme heat can affect everyone, older adults, infants, and younger children, people with chronic illnesses, including mental illness, and people who work outdoors or exercise outdoors are most vulnerable. In addition, if the air quality is poor, or if you see or smell smoke, you can reduce smoke exposure by staying inside with doors and windows closed, but keep cool. Being too hot poses more risk than breathing smoke for most people. If you do not have air conditioning and it's too warm to stay inside with the windows closed, seek out a local cooling or clean airspace. If you must spend time outside, consider using a well-fitted respirator-type mask like an N95 to reduce exposure to the fine particles from wildfire smoke. Check in on neighbors, families, and friends who are alone, especially those who are elderly, chronically ill, or have disabilities, in case they need help. While heat illnesses are serious, the good news is they can be prevented. Prenez des nouvelles de vos voisins, de votre famille et de vos amis qui vivent seuls, surtout ceux qui sont âgés, qui souffrent d'une maladie chronique et qui ont un handicap au cas où ils auraient besoin d'aide. Les maladies causées par la chaleur sont graves, mais elles peuvent être évitées. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech. I will now turn it over to Member of Parliament Dzerowicz to give some remarks.
Hello, thank you. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am joining you from Toronto, Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And it's a real pleasure for me to be here at this press conference with Minister Blair, Minister Duclos, and with our Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Theresa Tam. My colleagues have already provided a full overview of the current situation and the latest forecasting, but let me reiterate this fact. This wildfire season has been a record-breaking challenge, and it appears that we will continue to see heightened risk of wildland fire across Canada in the near future. This is a risk for all Canadians, those impacted by wildfires directly, as well as those in cities across the country, like here in Toronto, which at various points in time have experienced significant wildfire smoke. We have taken action and are working towards training 1,000 new firefighters. Indeed, my colleague, the Minister of Natural Resources, Jonathan Wilkinson, announced last month the training of 300 Indigenous firefighters and 125 fire guardians. We're also supporting all affected provinces and territories to get equipment that they need. 6 provinces and territories have participated in our Fighting and Managing Wildfires in a Changing Climate program last year, and we expect all 10 provinces to do so this year. Climate change is clearly impacting the intensity of these fires, and climate change is a global issue that requires global response. Countries increasingly work with each other when faced with extreme weather events, providing mutual aid and knowledge sharing when faced with extreme weather events. When needed, Canada has done its part. For example, when Australia had severe fire season in 2019 and 2020, 160 Canadian personnel were deployed to assist. And as this reciprocal aid becomes more common, in line with the increasing intensity of wildfires, ensuring that we have efficient and effective means of collaborating with international partners is key. And that is why today I am pleased to announce on behalf of my colleague, Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Natural Resources, that Canada has signed a memorandum of understanding to strengthen Canada and Portugal's cooperation on combating and mitigating wildland fires. By setting out this framework arrangement, reciprocal support will be able to flow more efficiently, including resources, personnel, and knowledge sharing, thereby enhancing our ability to fight wildland fires on both sides of the Atlantic. This MOU sets out procedures for the exchange of these resources and establishes systems that encourage mutual assistance and cooperation. As Portugal is recognized internationally by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development as a leader in wildlife fire management, transformation, and innovation, this MOU will provide an increased knowledge sharing, including the potential to accelerate training and technology transfer, science, and prevention strategies. Indeed, 140 Portuguese firefighters and other personnel have already served in Canada this year, and I know that there's more to come. As the proud member of Parliament of the riding with the largest Portuguese population in Canada, I want to thank the Portuguese government, Portuguese firefighters, and all those who have come to Canada for their incredible work and for all their help on the front lines. In the past, wildland fire resources sharing was impromptu and reactive to the needs of the moment. This memorandum of understanding will provide the governments of Canada and Portugal the clarity that we need to better fight this wildfire season and for seasons to come. And this is not our only international arrangement. As Minister Blair mentioned earlier, last month, Minister Wilkinson signed a similar MOU with the United States, and we have similar established arrangements with Mexico, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and others to ensure reciprocal support. We are continuing to work with our international partners to sign more MOUs so that when countries need a helping hand, the international community is there to assist. In the face of the most severe wildfire season in history, our top priority will always be in keeping Canadians safe. This arrangement with the Portuguese Republic and others like it will ensure effective cooperation on both sides of the Atlantic, advancing our joint efforts to protect livelihoods and communities from intense wildfires. Thank you.
Merci. Je crois que c'est maintenant la période de questions. So please, if you have a question and you're attending on Zoom, please use the raise hand function at this moment and I'll hand you over the floor. Première question, Émilie Bergeron de la Presse canadienne.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question est pour Monsieur Duclos. Le Québec et la province, c'est ce qu'on nous a dit du côté de Ressources naturelles Canada, le Québec est la province la plus touchée au niveau des hectares brûlés jusqu'à présent. Donc, est-ce que le gouvernement du Canada est prêt à aider, par exemple, l'industrie forestière du Québec et à fournir une aide pour les entreprises dans les régions particulièrement touchées du Québec, par exemple?
Et merci pour la question. Effectivement, au Québec, un peu moins en fait, un peu moins qu'ailleurs au Canada dans les dernières années, certainement par rapport à l'ouest du pays. On n'a pas autant senti les effets des changements climatiques en matière de feux de forêt, d'inondations, mais 2023 est effectivement très différent. Et ici à Québec, là, c'est très proche. Là, c'est à Baie-Saint-Paul, à Rivière-Éternité et tout le nord du Québec qu'on voit que les choses sont critiques. Et ce qui fait en sorte que la réaction du gouvernement canadien devait au départ être une réaction de secours. C'est venu par la Croix-Rouge, par la garde côtière, par les forces armées. M. Blair a annoncé il y a quelques instants que nous avons renouvelé et étendu l'appui des forces armées canadiennes aux communautés affectées. Et il va y avoir un besoin de reconstruction et d'appui plus continu et plus soutenu à long terme. C'est sur cette base qu'on va travailler avec le gouvernement du Québec et les municipalités concernées. Ça relève évidemment de mon collègue Jonathan Wilkinson et d'autres collègues au sein du gouvernement, mais je sais que comme Québécois qui sont très attentifs aux besoins de nos communautés et on peut compter sur eux pour faire le suivi.
J'irai sur un autre sujet pour ma question de suivi. Donc, le Conseil de la Fédération se réunira la semaine prochaine. Au niveau de l'augmentation des transferts en santé, ils avaient dit, les premiers ministres, que c'était bon, ils ont accepté votre offre, ils ont signé des ententes pour la plupart sur le Québec au niveau bilatéral, mais ils ont aussi dit que c'était insuffisant à long terme pour s'attaquer aux défis en santé. Donc, est-ce que le fédéral va être ouvert à discuter d'une augmentation autre que ce qui a été annoncé?
Bien, là-dessus, il y a deux très bonnes nouvelles à court et à moyen terme et une réponse à votre importante question pour le long terme. À court et à moyen terme, c'est que, comme vous l'avez noté, rapidement après l'annonce et l'offre du premier ministre Trudeau le 7 février dernier, les provinces, tous les premiers ministres ont répondu positivement. Ils ont accepté l'offre qui était effectivement généreuse puisqu'elle était à plusieurs niveaux et une offre aussi de plus long terme, s'étalant sur 10 ans. Donc, ce qui répondait à une des préoccupations importantes des provinces, c'était de savoir si ce niveau de financement accru substantiel allait pouvoir s'étirer sur plusieurs années. Cette bonne nouvelle était suivie d'un engagement par tous les premiers ministres, y compris par le gouvernement canadien, de mettre de traduire ces dollars en actions concrètes, en résultats concrets pour les travailleurs et pour les patients. Et le travail progresse bien. Aujourd'hui, les gens ont pu noter que le gouvernement des territoires du Nord-Ouest et le gouvernement du Yukon ont fait part de leur accord de principe formel, suite évidemment à l'annonce rapide que les premiers ministres de ces deux territoires ont pu faire dès le 13 février. Et à plus long terme, bien, on a convenu avec les premiers ministres des provinces et des territoires de revoir à la fois l'impact du financement actuel sur les progrès futurs et toute autre modalité qui devrait être changée autour de 2025-2026, à partir du moment auquel les premiers plans d'action de 3 ans auront été complétés. Donc, on travaille présentement sur des plans d'action de 3 ans, 2023-2026, sur essentiellement le premier tiers des investissements sur 10 ans. Et donc, en environ 3 ou 4 ans, par conséquent, on va pouvoir constater quels auront été les effets bénéfiques de ces investissements additionnels du gouvernement canadien et voir de quelle manière réaménager à la fois les investissements et les actions futures à plus long terme.
Merci. Next question, Theresa Tam, Global News.
Good afternoon. My question is for Dr. Tam. Has there been an increase in ER visits in hospitals across the country given the poor air quality and heat waves we're seeing right now in Ontario and Quebec?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think we know that through studies, short-term exposure to wildfire smoke, particularly the fine particulate matter, has been strongly associated with asthma exacerbations, increasing symptoms in people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and acute bronchitis and other emergency room visits and hospitalizations, and also associated with all-cause mortality. So that's what we know from studies. We don't have real-time reporting from ERs or jurisdictions at this point. So it would be more at the local level where they will be able to assess the hospital impacts.
Given the fact that the need is expected to grow, as you and your colleagues have pointed out, is the federal government doing anything to help provinces respond over the summer to these, to whatever increased needs they may see if emergency room visits do increase given this persistent heat and poor air quality?
I would point before perhaps Dr. Tam adds more. I would point that just 6 days ago, the one-time top-up of the Canada Health Transfer of $2 billion was sent to provinces and territories. So that was in reaction to the fact that over the last few weeks, in particular, we have seen emergency departments significantly impacted by the health human resources not being available and backlogs in surgeries and diagnostics, many of them related to COVID-19, impacting significantly healthcare workers and patients. So that $2 billion just sent to provinces and territories less than a week ago can be used by provinces and territories to address the fact that indeed workers and patients have been challenged and will be increasingly challenged over the next few weeks, as Dr. Tam alluded to.
I might just add that, as I've said in my opening remarks, both the impacts of wildfire smoke and extreme heat can be prevented. So I think one way that all of us can reduce impact on emergency rooms or the health system is by getting prepared before these events, as well as during the event, as I've said, taking note of alerts and warnings, looking at your WeatherCan app or listen to your local air quality statements, and then get your medications ready ahead of time, preparing your family, your pets, everybody, and then knowing where your local cooling and clean air centers are. Some of the really important basic things that all of us can do, and many of the measures that Minister Duclos also commented on during his remarks.
Merci. Prochaine question, Valérie Bain, Radio-Canada.
Oui, excusez-moi. La question pour le ministre Duclos. Quelles sont vos impressions générales de la situation actuelle, considérant que vous l'avez tous mentionné, qu'on est à une période historique, que ça ne semble pas vouloir ralentir? Vous réagissez comment lorsque vous voyez ça, qu'à chaque fois qu'on a une mise à jour, les choses ne semblent pas s'améliorer sur un plan global?
Bien, effectivement, la situation est critique. On a déjà noté que par rapport à la moyenne annuelle des 10 dernières années, nous sommes en ce moment à un niveau de feux de forêt à peu près 12 fois plus élevé que ce qui est normalement connu. En plus, au Québec, la situation, comme on l'a mentionné aussi il y a quelques instants, est particulièrement rare et grave. Ce sont généralement les provinces de l'Ouest qui connaissent des épisodes de feux de forêt intenses et des impacts sur la santé humaine par l'impact sur la qualité de l'air. Ce sont surtout ces provinces qui, au cours des dernières années, des dernières décennies, ont vécu ces événements. Mais maintenant, au Québec, on sait ce que ça représente avoir des feux de forêt importants et d'avoir des impacts en matière de qualité de l'air en milieu urbain. Alors, ce que ça veut dire, c'est deux choses. La première, c'est que l'on peut prévenir les effets aggravants et malheureusement encore plus troublants des changements climatiques au cours des prochaines années en continuant d'investir pour réduire l'impact de la pollution humaine sur notre milieu naturel. Et ça passe par toute une mesure que les gens connaissent bien maintenant, investir pour réduire la consommation de l'énergie, pour faire en sorte que cette énergie qui doit être consommée soit davantage propre, en investissant dans les transports collectifs et actifs, en isolant davantage nos maisons, en changeant les comportements des gens et en rendant la production industrielle plus propre. Mais ça permet aussi, ça nous amène aussi en deuxième lieu à faire ce que la Dr Tam nous invite à faire, c'est-à-dire que, étant donné que certains de ces effets des changements climatiques vont continuer à durer au cours des prochaines années, bien, les activités préventives qui nous protègent et qui protègent les autres sont des activités que l'on peut aussi utiliser pour, lorsque ces événements se produisent pour éviter les effets à court terme et les effets à plus long terme d'une mauvaise qualité de l'air, par exemple.
En fait, ma question était plus sur le plan humain. Vous réagissez comment à tout ce que vous voyez? Puis vous dites quoi à tous ces gens qui, depuis le début de l'été, vivent beaucoup de stress, qui sont déplacés? C'est plus là où je m'en allais avec ma question.
Bien, ça nous touche profondément, ça nous affecte beaucoup. On connaît presque tous et toutes quelqu'un, une famille ou même une communauté qui vit beaucoup de stress, parce que le stress est effectivement le bon terme, le stress mental, le stress physique, les évacuations, les déménagements, les retours, on déménage à nouveau. Tout ça, c'est du stress physique qui peut être particulièrement difficile à vivre pour les personnes plus vulnérables. Et c'est aussi beaucoup de soucis, beaucoup de stress mental. On a des difficultés à ne pas penser à tous ses amis ou toutes ses connaissances qui habitent dans des endroits qui sont lourdement impactés par les feux de forêt et la qualité de l'air. Ici, près de Québec, c'est proche, là, c'est à Baie-Saint-Paul, c'est à Rivière-Éternité, c'est au Lac-Saint-Jean, où des communautés et beaucoup de gens ont été malheureusement bouleversés par ce qui s'est passé au cours des dernières semaines. Et on va continuer d'être avec eux au cours des prochaines semaines parce qu'on sait que la situation risque malheureusement de ne pas s'améliorer. Et on va continuer d'être là les uns pour les autres.
Merci. Next up, Julie Dzerowicz, CTV.
Thank you for taking my question. I'd like to ask Mr. Blair, given that this is a record wildfire season, do we have a sense of just how much money, resources we have spent compared to the previous record-setting season? How much over are we? And, whether or not that plays into how we respond to any issues?
Yeah, thank you very much, Judy. And to be quite frank, we have not yet had the opportunity, working with our provincial territorial partners who do the lion's share of the work in fighting these fires, been able to put a precise cost at this point in time on the response. But it has been an extraordinary response in response to an extraordinary situation. And so we've been able to deploy significant additional firefighting resources, as you've already heard. And I won't reiterate about the number of international resources that have been brought in, close to 2,000 people currently deployed from international deployments. And the provinces have been working very hard on this. I want to I know we've said that the situation has been unprecedented and the worst season on record, and the forecast for the coming months is also quite challenging, and it certainly is. But I think there is also some reason from optimism. And for example, in Quebec, we've been monitoring the situation in Quebec very, very carefully. The weather forecast for the next 2 weeks actually appears to provide significant relief to most areas of Quebec. And I would characterize the current situation in Quebec as an example as being, although very challenging, well managed by the Quebec authorities with the support that they have received both internationally and from the federal government, the Canadian Armed Forces, for an example. There is a program in place that enables the federal government to provide financial assistance through our disaster financial assistance arrangement to all the provinces and territories who are significantly impacted by these type of weather-related emergencies and disasters. There are funds available to assist with the firefighting costs of certain eligible costs with respect to the fighting of the fire itself, and also there are eligible expenses for provinces and territories to make submission for reimbursement of costs associated to recovery of damaged homes, businesses, and critical infrastructure. We'll be working closely with the provinces and territories to determine exactly what that cost is. But those systems are well understood. The disaster financial assistance arrangement has been in place for over 50 years. Eligibility requirements are well understood. Certainly, I believe the cost of this one will be as high as this event has been extreme in its impact across the country. But at the same time, most of the fires have been taking place in remote communities. And just as an example, we had over 4,000 people in Quebec that were evacuated from their communities. Those evacuation orders have now been lifted. People are being able to be repatriated to their homes. There are still some impacts on critical infrastructure and highways, but it's being exceptionally well managed by the provincial authorities with the support they're receiving from the federal government and from international partners. And so we certainly want to make sure that Canadians understand that this is an extremely challenging event right across the country, and in certain parts of the country even more challenging. But the work that has been going on between the provinces and territories, the federal government, and our international partners, I also want to assure Canadians that the situation is being very well managed by our provincial and territorial authorities with the supports that they've been receiving. And as we then tally up the bill for fighting the fires and also recovering from these costs, the federal government will be there to support the provinces and territories and Canadians right across the country who've been impacted by these fires, as we have been there for them during the evacuations and in helping to assist with the firefighting itself. We'll also be there for them as we recover from these events.
This is a two-pronged follow-up question, if I can take that liberty. First of all, if you can give me a sense of whether or not any firefighters have been injured or civilians during this time. We don't really have a sense on a broad scale what those numbers are nationally.
Yeah, thank you for that. And to the best of my knowledge, that there was one firefighter who was fairly seriously injured in Alberta fighting fires. There's also been, in relation to other weather-related events, two firefighters in the Saguenay region, for example, lost their lives in response to a flooding situation. To the best of my information, no Canadians have been seriously injured in these fires. There's been a significant damage, obviously, to communities and to private property, but there has been no loss of life directly related to these fires. And I think that's a testament to the incredible professionalism of our wildfire resources, firefighting resources right across the country, the training and equipment that they use. They have been able to protect life and limb, which is our first responsibility. And then they're also doing exceptional work. I've seen extraordinary pictures of the fires in Nova Scotia, for example, where the fires burned right up to the edge of a private residence, and firefighters were able to save that residence. Now, they haven't been able to save every property, but they've done extraordinary work, and they've been able to protect Canadians throughout this very difficult event.
And my final question, if I may, in regards to the Indigenous firefighters that were being trained, were they put on the front lines right away as part of their training to fight the fires as well with the Guardians? And do you have a sense of what type of infrastructure has been damaged within these First Nation communities? How bad is the damage?
Well, I can tell you that we've been tracking that very carefully. First of all, Indigenous communities are disproportionately impacted by these types of events because their communities are often located in remote and isolated areas very close into the forest. And at the same time, we also acknowledge Indigenous communities have been keepers of the land and have traditional knowledge, which is incredibly helpful to be incorporated into the way in which we manage these fires and which we put them out. And so we're making significant investments in training additional Indigenous firefighters and making sure they have the equipment in order to do that job. But we also incorporated that traditional knowledge into that training. Certainly they're immediately impacted and are being put to work as quickly as that training and equipment is able to be put in place. We recognize it as a priority. They already do an extraordinary job across the country. We're making sure they have additional resources and training in order to do all the things that need to be done to protect those communities. And for those Indigenous communities, I will tell you that the majority of the evacuations that have taken place have been in Indigenous communities. As I've said, over 47, I believe, communities have been impacted by these fires. in the vast majority of cases, the community was evacuated not because the flames were coming in close to town, although some of them have been in fairly close proximity to Indigenous communities, but the smoke made the health situation intolerable. And under an abundance of caution, and quite appropriately, their leadership has ordered evacuations, and we've been able to assist through Indigenous Services Canada and our provincial partners and territorial partners in helping evacuate those people from that unhealthy situation. But so far, there has not been significant impact in Indigenous communities as a result of fire, but mostly as a result of smoke. Having said that, we also recognize that where there is damage to property and or critical infrastructure in those communities, we have a responsibility and we'll be there to help them rebuild.
Thank you. Next up, Laura Osman, Canadian Press.
Good afternoon. Thanks for taking our questions. My questions are for Minister Duclos about these territories that have joined the health accords. I'm wondering if you can explain what the breakthrough was in those negotiations that led those territories to sign on, and what is holding up Quebec?
Thank you, and thank you for pointing to that good news that was shared this morning, that we have now received letters stating agreements in principle from the Northwest Territories and from the Yukon. That great news is obviously supportive of the other great news that we were able to share in February, when all premiers agreed formally in public with the offer that had been made by the Prime Minister. Since then, with territorial health ministers, we had a number of conversations because for two reasons. First, the healthcare needs in the territories are significant, and second, the cost of serving these needs is also very significant for all sorts of obvious reasons. The fact that communities are remote in many cases, and the cost of hiring workers is larger, and there are many Indigenous communities in the territories who have been underserved from a healthcare perspective over the years. So that explained why it took a little longer for an official letter of agreement in principle to be shared and sent by those territories. We look forward to receiving the next one, the one from Nunavut, quite soon, which will then lead the three territories to write and share action plans. Now, for Quebec, Premier Legault on February the 13th said publicly that he was in agreement with the offer that had been made by Prime Minister Trudeau a week earlier. And so from that point, we have been working together with Minister Dubé to make sure that we would be also receiving a letter of agreement in principle from the Quebec government. They have been back and forth. We know how important it is for Quebecers also to benefit from the additional federal investment in supporting patients and workers in the province.
Thank you for that. Has the agreement with the territories changed at all since the initial offer in February, or is the agreement that was signed the same one that the premiers sort of signed on to in February?
There was indeed a change, an amendment, which was important to make, and that was on the length of duration for what is called the Territorial Health Investment Fund. The initial offer covered a 5-year agreement for that important fund to the three territories. And we heard and understood that it was important to have a 10-year plan for the Territorial Health Investment Fund. TIF, as it is called, is supplementary to the Canada Health transfers. It's also supplementary to the bilateral transfers that will be made over the next 10 years. It was important. It took a little while. It was important to link all these things together. In addition to that, there had been conversations with Minister Hajdu, Patty Hajdu, responsible for Indigenous services, so that the overall relationship, inclusive of the needs of Indigenous peoples in the Northern Territories, could be part of the overall agreement.
Thanks, Minister.
Merci. Next question, Gerhard Brown, freelance.
Do you hear me? Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes.
A question for Minister Blair. I'm working for newspapers in Germany, and I recently talked to a CEO of a German startup company who developed infrared technology that's positioned on satellites to monitor the situation. And I heard that some time ago, Canada started a procurement process for this monitoring program. Can you update us on this? How far are we? And could we also use here in Canada the system of detecting hotspots very, very early through these satellite photos?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gerhard, for the question. The Natural Resources Canada, NRCan, has received a significant budget and are in the process of building out a new satellite system that will provide first of all, very broad coverage to every part of Canada. Because of the current satellite coverage there are certain inadequacies and spots that are not covered. Also, in part of that, it will be significant new investments in technology that will help us identify hotspots and also undertake the analysis that is necessary. Not every wildfire is necessarily problematic. They are natural events, but where there is close interface to residential communities, Indigenous communities, or critical infrastructure, or where the fire itself can also cause other interface problems, such as the smoke that impacted most of the eastern seaboard from the Quebec fires, then the decisions can be made for the appropriate deployment of resources. I might suggest if you are in contact with, we're interested in every innovation, and if you're in contact with some people that might have information that they feel may be useful to NRCan, I would encourage them to share it with them.
Follow up, Gerhard?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Sure. We'll go to David Turton, CBC News.
Hi. When you, Minister Blair, talk to your provincial and territorial counterparts, what plan is there to extinguish these wildfires? Is it just the wildfires that are causing a threat to communities? I ask this because, if you let these wildfires burn, yes, buildings might be destroyed if they don't threaten a community, but the smoke does have tremendous impact on other places. So what's the thinking and the plan, the tactical plan behind extinguishing these flames?
And again, thank you for the question, David. The responsibility for determining how to deploy the resources and what additional resources they may require is for the provinces and territories. And quite frankly, they have very robust systems in place in order to do that and determine on where they'll deploy their resources and how they will fight the fires occurring within their jurisdiction. We also have a very robust interprovincial and international coordinating agents through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, CIFC, that we also refer to on where resources can be drawn upon. I think in all my conversations with my provincial and territorial partners, the priority obviously has to be in protecting Canadians' lives and safety, also protecting those homes, those communities, those businesses, and critical infrastructure. Those can be power stations or mining facilities or energy facilities. Those things are and supply chain routes. Those things are essential to Canadians right across the country, and so that's where the priority is. But I will also tell you there is an acknowledgement, and certainly as an example, there was conversation with Mr. Bonadel in Quebec about the impact of fires, the fires in Quebec were having on the eastern seaboard, for example, just because under the circumstances, the way the winds were blowing and the jet stream, a lot of that smoke was finding its way over very populated areas in Toronto, Montreal, but also in New York and Washington and Philadelphia and other places, impacting both the economy and the health of the people living in those places. And so there were decisions made about fighting those fires and containing them. But again, our first priority is the health and safety of all the people impacted by these fires and the protection of people's homes, their communities, and critical infrastructure. And so that's how those decisions are made. There are, and just as an example, there's a vast fire, over 500,000 hectares burning in the Donnie Creek area in British Columbia right now. the firefighters in British Columbia at Wildfire BC and Emergency Management BC have been working hard to contain that fire. And it's very challenging because of its vast size, but it's primarily in a very isolated area of the boreal forest. Its major impact is its potential to close the Alaska Highway, which passes about 4 kilometers from there. And so the work that they are doing is to maintain that critical infrastructure, that supply route, which is important to the Yukon and to Alaska, and to keep it open as well as protect the communities around there as they work very hard to contain the largest fire in their history.
Can I just ask you to expand about the conversations that were held with your Quebec counterpart? Was this conversations around tackling a fire that otherwise would not have posed a major threat to infrastructure, buildings, or communities, but because it was causing significant smoke to waft into places and cities in Canada and the U.S.? There were conversations about that wildfire. Can you just
fighting wildfires in Quebec it's an operational decision that is led by the province of Quebec, and we're there in support. But they recognize obviously the impact that the smoke from those fires was having. We refer to as interface. Interface can be when the fire comes in close to a community and threatens homes and people, but it can also be impacted. And we're seeing that interface as a result of smoke impacting on communities. That smoke from those fires was impacting Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa quite significantly, but it also extended south of the border. The smoke doesn't respect our borders, and it was impacting on literally tens of millions of people. And so, again, it's an operational decision on how they fight their fires. And my job is to support the province of Quebec. But Mr. Bonnezel and the province of Quebec were very mindful of the impact that their fires were having on so many people. And they, sought additional resources. And we were very fortunate because, Prime Minister spoke to the president. I had the opportunity to speak to the administrator of FEMA. Our interagency organization CIFC was in contact with their American counterparts. We were able to obtain additional help and resources very quickly from them and other supports. But the operational decisions on fighting fires in Quebec is Quebec's responsibility. Our job is to support them in every way necessary. They asked for that support, and we said yes immediately.
Thank you. This press conference is almost done, but I see that hands are back up again. So I'll take the few minutes just for quick follow-up. Émilie Bergeron, rapidement, une dernière question.
Oui, Monsieur Duclos, j'aimerais vous entendre en français sur pourquoi le Québec n'a pas encore signé d'entente bilatérale en santé. Vous avez mentionné que ça fait depuis le 13 février, je crois que Monsieur Legault a dit publiquement là, qu'il était d'accord avec l'offre. Alors, pourquoi depuis le 13 février, là, on n'a toujours pas d'entente signée? Ça fait plusieurs mois déjà.
Je dirais que c'est une combinaison d'une bonne nouvelle et d'une hâte. La bonne nouvelle, c'est que le premier ministre Legault, rapidement après la rencontre du 7 février, je crois que c'était le 13 février, avait publiquement et en solidarité avec les autres premiers ministres accepté l'offre qui avait été faite par le premier ministre Trudeau et s'engageait donc à faire le suivi avec M. Dubé pour que des plans d'action et qu'un suivi puisse être développé et apporté. La hâte, c'est évidemment que comme tous les autres Canadiens ici au Québec, les patients et les travailleurs ont besoin de ces investissements fédéraux additionnels. On a donc hâte de voir de quelle manière le gouvernement du Québec va vouloir utiliser ces fonds additionnels du gouvernement fédéral pour investir davantage en appui aux travailleurs et donc, par conséquent, en appui aux besoins importants des patients partout dans la province.
Merci, Gerard. I see that you have another question. Was that a hands up, Gerard? We can't hear you, so I am sorry. I will put an end to, I hear something. No, okay. David Turton, I see your hands back up again. So a very last, really short follow-up, and after that we put an end to this press conference. Thank you.
Hi, and just Minister Blair, I know you probably said this at the beginning of the news conference, but just can you reiterate why this wildfire season so far has shattered so many records and why Canadians need to take the warnings today seriously?
Yeah, thank you, David. As we've tracked this every year, we knew that going in, and NRCan put out a forecast earlier this in the spring that certainly indicated that the conditions that existed across the country and the weather projections were sobering and concerning. But we saw the wildfire season, particularly in two places. In Alberta first, started about 3 or 4 weeks earlier than we would normally see. And we track this very carefully, and we look at annual averages. There is no real average. We have very difficult seasons and then sometimes not so difficult seasons. But this one started earlier in Alberta and then rather extraordinarily in Nova Scotia. We saw, two very significant, actually a number of significant fire events in both of those provinces with large areas being burned and many people being displaced. And then we have also seen that this is one of the hottest years on record, and that there are hot, dry conditions that persist in very many parts of the country. And so we quite frankly anticipated that this would be a challenging year, but I think part of the challenge has been the remote areas in which many of these fires have taken place, and the speed with which they have spread. And so there are obviously lessons to be learned by that. I would not want to suggest that this is the new normal. But certainly what we have seen over the course of the last several years is an increase in the frequency and severity of these events. And certainly this year, without precedent, we're now seeing, previous records for areas burned have been shattered. We've had very serious fire seasons in the past, but this one, just by sheer volume, exceeds our historic experience. And so I think that it does therefore necessitate that, given the difficult conditions, the concerning conditions that persist right across many parts of the country, that we think it's very important that Canadians be aware of their risk, that they take the steps that are necessary to prepare and to plan in order to mitigate and those risks, and as well that because it's not just simply when the flames might burn close to your community, but when that smoke from other fires in other parts of the country comes into your community, we think it's very important that Canadians have a good understanding of their risks, and the advice that they've received today, I think, will be very helpful in helping them make the right decisions in order to protect themselves and their families and to respond to this very difficult situation, as our officials right across the country, firefighters, emergency management personnel, our provincial partners, and our international partners are all working so hard in order to contain and to manage these unprecedented fires. And at the same time, we want to make sure that Canadians remain safe.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup d'être présent à cette press conference. Passez une belle journée. Au revoir.